Who am I? The Capricorn. Secrets of the Zodiac. By Gypsy Deville. Part 1, Chapter 3. When a Young Mind Breaks. Pay attention to this next phase of my life because it can get a little confusing, but I will try to make it as quick and clear as possible. Again, this is just an overview, so I won't waste too much of your time with too many details. However, here is where the dark side of me, or shadow self, comes to complete fruition and takes the lead. Leaving Huntsville in a hurry the way that we did, prevented my mom from doing any type of pre-planning before our arrival in Atlanta. So for several weeks we lived in various hotels, where I was introduced to the city in the most corrupt ways. This would be where I experienced my first one-night stand, which was phenomenally horrific. And nothing like a Sex in the City episode. After a couple of months of hotel hopping, my mother and I got into one of our epic dramatic arguments, which basically resulted with her telling me that I could just go back to Huntsville and live with my father, who was currently living with his fiancée at the time and her 3 children. In my mind I was thinking, why didn't you just offer this in the first place? The next day she put me on the Greyhound back to Huntsville, and I could not have been happier. Only no one thought it worthy to inform me that once you leave a place, things are never the same when you return, even though I was only gone a couple of months. Since school already started by the time I arrived, I missed my chance to do any of the football season activities, because I'd been gone the entire summer that they practiced. Not to mention, all of the inside jokes and secret scandals or hookups. I was no longer in the inner circle of knowing. So now I'm back to feeling like an outsider all over again, as my friends all had their own things going on. I had another set of friends, of course, but they were those who I usually got into trouble with. You know those friends your parents hated for you to associate with? Prior to, I was always too busy to hang with them like I wanted to because of all of my extracurriculars, but now, I had nothing to do. And a car. Me and boredom have always been a tricky combo, because it can either lead to creativity or mayhem. In fact, whenever I was not engaged in something productive, was when I usually got into the most trouble. Even more insulting was my new living conditions with my dad. I can admit that I was obsessed with my new step-family when we first met, even feeling that my brother's accident might have brought us closer. Moving in with them, however, made the entire situation weird and uncomfortable very quickly. My stepmother was literally my dad's servant, spending her days tending to his every need. Cooking his meals and ironing his clothes while watching the Braves games, to even sitting in the bathroom while he bathed, all becoming her day's highlights. Meanwhile, with my father never stopping his extracurriculars with the ladies, it became really sad to witness. Furthermore, my dad was acting extremely brand new and allowing rules that would have never been considered in my mother's house. My big brother came to live with us for a couple of weeks as well, just in time to experience some of this nonsense. For instance, my dad and my stepmom came up with the brilliant idea that, moving forward, each of us kids would receive $20 apiece to feed ourselves for the entire week. I'm sure there was an intended method to this madness, but no one thought to at least teach us what we needed to know to survive off of this, and we were ranging from ages 12 to 17 years, each weighing 200+ pounds. Looking at my father, I waited for him to smile and say that they were just joking, but instead he just stood there nodding his head like this made sense. So, we would stock up on ramen noodles, while my stepmom continued cooking gourmet meals for her and my father. After fixing their plates for dinner, she'd also fix his lunch for the next day, and then store any leftovers in the refrigerator, which of course we were forbidden to touch. Any drinks that were brought into the house would remain in their room as well, so I also began to love drinking water, since I could barely afford to feed myself. Oh, and there was also the only one present rule for Christmas. Honestly, this would not have bothered me though, if not for the fact that my step-siblings had other family members, including their grandparents, to get them additional presents as well, something I never had. So being the only one sitting there on Christmas Day with the one present was definitely not merry for me. Yeah, the next few months were torture, and it would only get worse. My relationships with my 2 stepsisters and stepbrother were great, or so I thought. I was often hanging with them and their friends when I wasn't off with my own, and in my mind, we were all family. But somewhere along the way I obviously missed the memo, because out of nowhere the script flipped on me without warning. Thinking back, the eldest of the three was really giving me funny vibes for several days towards the end, but I really didn't think much of it at the time with everything I already had clouding my head. Well, it all culminated one night when I missed curfew, and she purposely locked me out of the house just to ensure that I'd get in trouble. I honestly cannot remember all the details of the conversation after I finally entered the house, but I remember feeling beyond fed up with her constant shade, having that same passive-aggressive personality as my mother's. Caring less about getting in trouble, and more so, determined to check the hell out of this bitch. Next thing I know we're fighting, to the point that my stepmom had to come break us up by pulling me off of her. Once she did, however, she started yelling at me about something totally different. Accusing me of things that I did not do or say, leaving me speechless since I was honestly clueless as to where any of this BS was even coming from. In fact, she claimed that one of her sources was from the mother of my twin friends, whom I'd been friends with since middle school, but never once speaking with their mother for more than 5 minutes the entire time I lived in Huntsville. I was fully prepared to take my punishment for breaking curfew, and of course for beating my stepsister's ass, but what the hell was my stepmother talking about? My father had come into the room as well, once again just standing there, nodding his head as if this was okay. It had become clear that they'd already discussed this, and I was the only one shocked by what was falling out of her face. This is the only part of this scenario that actually hurt me. My daddy had disappointed me several times in the past, but I never imagined that anyone else had the power to actually come between us, not even my own mother. This type of heartbreak is completely different, and all the more consuming, from that which can be caused by, say, a lover, because this was my daddy, my hero, the one who always had my back. So needless to say, that this is where I completely lost it. Snap, crackle and pop. Going off on each and everyone in the damn room, one by one. Releasing every single thought I had purposely suppressed, in attempts of trying my best not to be the one to add to what was already a tense living situation. And once I concluded in saying my piece, I demanded them to send me back to my mother immediately. Clearly there was nothing else to talk about. I returned back to Atlanta in time to begin the second semester of my junior year, and by this time my mother had found a new home. The nicest house on the whole block, dead smack in the middle of the hood, next door to a bald-headed prostitute. And understand that the hoods in Atlanta made those in Huntsville look like suburbs. We lived in what I lovingly call Crackhorville. It was common to see on a daily basis 10 dudes on the corner by the bus stop competing to sell you drugs, or a chick as young as 14 years old walking down the streets, willing to do something strange for a little change. But this quickly became home. Of course, my mama was none the wiser as to where she had moved to, until it was too late. Never knowing about the trap house around the corner where I met the 6 guys that would become brothers to me, genuinely treating me like a little sister. I loved them and they looked out for me for no reason at all, providing me everything from weed, money, food, to a place to stay, something I will forever be grateful for. There was also the corner store owned by Mr. Kenny, who was like the neighborhood's favorite uncle. He would also look out for me, allowing me to credit my purchases if not just give them to me for free. My first day at South Atlanta High School was overwhelming to say the least, having no clue that a school could be that freaking huge. Definitely a different vibe from my old high school in Huntsville. However, I quickly went into my new girl role, which I was very familiar. Meeting 2 chicks named Precious the very first day that I arrived. Funny part about this was the fact that Precious happens to be one of my many aliases as well. Having one for each of my personalities. So to eliminate any more confusion, I decided to go with Pooh, especially since this school already had 100 versions of my real name. The 3 of us immediately clicked though and grew close quickly. One of them actually lived a few houses from me, and I later found out the other was living in a group home where she was being mistreated. Being one that could never just stand by and watch those I care about suffer, I successfully plotted her escape from that hell hole, which we flawlessly executed on the last day of school, escaping on the MARTA train, which we rode until eventually locating some of her family in Decatur. Of course, I did not waste any time getting busy with activities either. Penny is a good friend that I met my first day in band class, who happened to also be the first chair of the clarinets, immediately appointing me the second chair, after learning that I could read music and hearing me play. Apparently, there was a shortage of band members at this school, so they were desperate. This definitely wasn't the JOJ marching jags I was used to and so desperately missed. Which is probably why I never again felt truly motivated as I once was, eventually falling all the way into the background, especially by my senior year. Well, that and the fact that the band teacher allowed my clarinet to get stolen, but let's change the subject before I get mad all over again. Just know someone still owes me a clarinet, and I ain't letting it go, Mr. Dallas. Other activities included a modern dance group, and a performing arts program for youth, PAPI, sponsored by Jane Fonda. This school had an amazing choir as well. My new choir teacher was located in room 112, which is how the famous R&B group, who happens to be her former students, got their name. So seeing members of this group in our classroom was common at this school. I began modeling after meeting this fancy lady, at a nail salon, who kept going on and on about how much she loved my walk, asking me to participate in a few shows she had lined up. Also getting my first job within a week, at a Popeyes located inside a Kroger, where I also officially met Willie, who was currently working at that Kroger, and extremely persistent after seeing me at school already. Most of the students at that school had all grown up together, so I stood out like a sore thumb as the new girl. It was obviously important to him to snatch me up before anyone else had the chance. Quickly becoming my boyfriend and making the adjustment in my new school just that much easier, because he was very popular. By the end of the semester, the only name I was known by was Fife's Girl. Even though I was adapting pretty quickly, no one will ever truly understand the things Atlanta was teaching me, and how this was corruptly shaping my entire mindset for the future. Elevating my hustle mentality and manipulation skills to new levels. Not only was I mastering how to maneuver in the streets, but also in life. Fearless, bold, and able to collaborate with anyone for a come-up, from a dope boy to a manager. Utilizing these skills at any job I'd have, as I always figured out ways of getting paid beyond what appeared on my paycheck. There's no way to sugarcoat the fact that I was robbing the hell out of every single employer I had in those days. To the point that I would give my mother my checks, because my pockets were already full. I was able to buy my own school supplies, clothes, and shoes, get my hair and nails done, and do whatever I wanted, without having to ask permission. Oh, and as I mentioned, I still had my own car, which my father gave me shortly after I got my license when I turned 16, a beautiful two-door Nissan 240SX. There was not much anyone could tell me because I was learning how to hold my own, while being smart about my movement, to ensure I didn't get caught up. My mother somehow lost her car, for whatever reason that escapes me, so of course she began driving mine. However, within months, my car was utterly destroyed, thanks a lot, Ma. Not too long after that, my brothers and I were informed that we were moving again, but outside of my school district. I was not willing, this time, to start a new school again, because this was the middle of my senior year. So now, having to commute via transit, my days went as follows. At the bus stop by 6 a.m. to make it to school by 8 a.m., leave school, take the bus to work, get off work between 10 to 11 p.m. and take the bus home. In bed by 12:30 to 1 a.m., and repeat. It was exhausting and I was still trying to make time for my dramatic-ass relationship as well. Willie's mother was, let's just say, different, but would often kick him out of the house. So, I would sneak him through my window and let him spend the night with me. But he was jealous and controlling, so we argued non-stop and would often get into hilarious fights. Like the one where we ended up rolling around in a pile of red ants that ate our asses up. I can only imagine what my mother must have thought of us running into the house, ripping our clothes off and screaming, as we jumped into the shower with no explanation. Or the one when we worked together at Ms. Winner's, arguing in front of everybody during our shift, and I embarrassingly busted my ass on the wet floor trying to chase him. Needless to say, I quit. Luckily, I still graduated with the class of 2000, top 20%, which actually sucked because only the top 10 got recognized. However, naively failing to prepare for anything after graduation. Seems like everyone just sort of stopped worrying about me, especially once I started working. So, no one told me I had to apply for scholarships and to the schools I wanted to attend. Innocently thinking that all those things were supposed to just come to you. None of that mattered though, because I had a much greater problem at hand. I was pregnant. Most girls are happy about news like this, but I definitely have never been one of those girls. In fact, out of all of my friends growing up, I was the one who would always say I was never having kids or getting married, due to my own trauma, obviously. Just knowing that I'd be traveling the world, too busy, perfectly content with being someone's favorite auntie or godmother. Little did I know, each of my children were destined to play a part in saving my life, on different levels. I literally hid my first pregnancy, carrying this secret even when crossing that stage to receive my diploma. I did try to tell Willie, who was now my ex, immediately after I finally realized what was happening to me. But he just looked at me, with a condescending smirk, and obnoxiously asked, "Who you pregnant by?" As if I hadn't been his girl for the last year and a half. But I just looked right back at him, and simply replied, "Don't even worry about it." A week after graduation, my mother and I got into one of our epic arguments, again. This one actually began because, after cleaning the entire house by myself, I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich which left some crumbs on the kitchen counter. And this altercation actually got so heated, that she kicked me out of the house. And just like that, for the first time, I was homeless. On my own, having no car, no job, no home, and pregnant. Between my pockets and purse, I was able to scrape together enough money to make it to the 5 Points train station downtown Atlanta. Out of desperation and fearlessness, I made the foolish decision to hitchhike with a guy I met while I was coming out of the train station, riding with him at least 45 minutes, as I made my way back to Polar Rock. I was on guard the entire time though, as he was unaware of the butterfly blade I had hidden in my breast if shit ever went left. Of course, I went straight to the trap house, where my brothers took me in, without hesitation. However, not without them immediately questioning me upon arrival, about who the hell dude was, that I'd pulled up to their spot with. Which was then followed by 20 minutes of them annoyingly scolding me, after hearing the reckless decision that I made in order to get to them. It was like having 6 dads. Turns out that they were right to do so too, because a few days later, we ended up seeing the same guy I hitchhiked with, on a Crime Stoppers commercial as one of the state's most wanted. I won't even tell you what all he was wanted for. They were always hard on me, in their own lovingly thugged out ways, insisting that I be better than them and make something out of myself. They had so much faith in my potential and future, and they were literally betting on me. I remember the first time I caught them snorting cocaine, and I asked them if I could see what it looked like and try it. I'd never seen anyone do anything like that, besides on movies like Scarface, so I was intrigued. Do you know that these motherfuckers literally spent the next 3 hours taking turns cussing me out, threatening that if they ever found out that I had touched the stuff, they would beat my ass themselves? So needless to say, that was the one and only time that we ever had that conversation. Trying not to be anyone's burden, I would cluelessly roam the streets of Polar Rock for the next couple of weeks, catching hustles here and there to survive another day. Until one day my father, somehow, found me and brought me back to Huntsville. He was no longer with his former fiancée at this point either. Apparently, he cancelled his former engagement. Well, more like had a panic attack, that he mistook for a heart attack, and viewed as a sign from God to not get married, the day before the wedding. Hilarious. So, he was now living with his new girlfriend Shirley, who I absolutely love to this day, and who will always remain one of my favorite people in life. Welcoming me in with open arms, enrolling me at Alabama A&M, where I majored in psychology, and even helping me get a job at Walmart. As grateful as I was still a little skeptical when it came to my father, especially after what happened the last time that I'd lived with him. Those feelings paled to my guilt though, from hiding my pregnancy. And also my guilt from stealing his and Shirley's weed, but that is our secret. Not eating correctly, nor receiving any type of prenatal care, and still smoking heavily, caused me to lose so much weight that no one even noticed my stomach. I did finally confess to my cousin, my TT, and my best friend Rosie, who were all really supportive. But neither of them had any way of actually helping me in this situation. One night, at Walmart, I began to cramp really bad while I was working. Excusing myself to the bathroom, I realized that I was spotting blood, with pain that would not allow me to ignore it. So, I had no choice but to call my dad and have him take me to the emergency room. This is when my dad was finally informed that I was pregnant. However, he did not react anything like I feared he would, and it was almost as if he already knew. He was beyond supportive, and once again I saw him as my hero. We discussed options, and I even went to the abortion clinic for a consultation. But after seeing the brutal methods they would have to use, because of how far along I was in the pregnancy, I just couldn't do it. So, we scheduled my first doctor's appointment, which was to be on October 31st, 2000. The week before the appointment, I finally told my mother I was pregnant as well, who also reacted nothing like I expected. I had carried this burden all this time for nothing. Both of my parents were absolutely amazing and immediately stepped up as the foundation to my support system. In the midst of all of this, there's this one particular unexpected turn of events. Riding with my cousin to drop her husband off at work one night, as I did often, she pulls up in front of his job to let him out. Preparing to move to the front seat, I vaguely noticed this guy standing on the corner in front of us, but as usual not thinking too much of it. As her husband opens the door, the lights come on in the car, and immediately someone yells my name. Remember the guy I mentioned earlier, who I would steal my mama's car to go see? Yes indeed, dude on the corner was Shade Tree. Random as hell this was, because I searched for him as soon as I got back to Huntsville, but he was nowhere to be found. Seeing him that night was a breath of fresh air, like my waiting to exhale moment. Our connection was indescribable, and it felt as if we'd never been apart. I immediately told him I was pregnant before we could even get started with any other conversations, prepared for that to be the end of the discussion. However, he gently put his hand on my stomach, and simply said that we were both a gift, me and my baby. I want to quickly rewind back to when Shade Tree and I officially met. Although we went to school together, he was a couple classes above me. I honestly only remember seeing him around school grounds maybe 2 or 3 times, always in his own zone, walking around with headphones on, rapping to himself, with this slow-motion nonchalant way he moved. He was extremely talented, in my opinion, maybe could have even been the next Andre 3 Stacks. He introduced himself to me at a talent show that my friends and I were competing in, as our dance group protege. Shade Tree and his best friend had a rap group that competed as well. Unfortunately for them though, my friends and I swept the competition. As we were leaving, Shade Tree grabbed me before I could walk out the door, pulling me into him with his hands around my waist. The sincere way he looked in my eyes when he spoke, as he towered over me, completely weakened me. He concluded by giving me his number and insisting that I call, which I wasted no time doing as soon as I got home. We immediately became each other's craving, hence my willingness back then to do whatever, just to see him. He was also another reason I never wanted to leave Huntsville in the first place. So running back into him now, finally seeing him again, brought me so much instant joy and felt like fate or destiny. I practically moved in with him and his family within a couple days by spending the night and never leaving. It was always that way with him, everything just happened effortlessly without thought. I admired how he would care for his little sisters, while his mama worked a graveyard shift, and his father would be off lost in his addiction. Family was everything to him, and he often sacrificed for them, mostly without them ever knowing. It was the entire reason he started selling drugs as a teenager in the first place, and why he was so adamant about his music. He was a gentle giant, that most just viewed as a thug, not understanding that he was a beautiful mind of creative genius, with a heart longing to be loved, and I wanted to give it to him. The morning that I was scheduled to see my OB-GYN for the first time was the morning my water broke. So apparently, I was more pregnant than I thought. Doctors were even weary to make any decisions on how to proceed during my labor, since no one knew exactly how far along I actually was. They feared she may have been premature, without having the proper medical documentation. Which of course I did not have because I hadn't seen any doctors besides my trip to the ER. I suffered 32 hours of labor, most without epidural, before the world was finally and unexpectedly introduced to my brand new baby girl. And despite the fact that I did nothing right during my pregnancy, she was absolutely flawless. I will never be able to explain that feeling, when they finally placed her in my arms. I never felt such immediate love and attachment to anything in my life, as I experienced with the births of my children. This kind of love was so new for me with my firstborn though, so pure, unselfish, and unconditional. I knew immediately that I would be willing to lay down my life for her. That's why she is called my heart. Because she was the first to truly give me one. My daughter was a miracle in more ways than one. Having nothing prepared for her arrival, by the time I left the hospital, she had more than I could have imagined or asked for. I literally did not have to buy much for her the entire first year of her life. And guess who else came back into the picture? My dad's former fiancée, who I still call my stepmom to this day. Not only was she back, but she loved, spoiled, and embraced my baby as her own. While I was still in the hospital, my baby made another miracle happen as well, getting a phone call in my hospital room from Willie. Guessing my mom must have told him that I had the baby. However, it was what he said that really threw me off. He had the audacity to ask me, "Why did you leave Atlanta with my baby?" Pause for crickets. "Excuse me? Oh, this is your baby now?" I was just as amused as I was irritated, but definitely too exhausted to have the conversation, as I politely hung up the phone in his face. Naming her was something else I failed to pre-plan for as well, but I have always believed that you have to see the child in order to know if a name fits them before you can choose anyways. It was almost as if her name just came to me when I looked her in the eyes, Messiah. Coincidentally, one of the meanings of her name is, surrounded by a song. And everyone knows music was my first love. I also gave her my last name because I was not married and knew I, alone, was the one who would be raising this baby. Within a few months after having my baby, Shade Tree and I moved into our first apartment together. My life was beginning to resemble, what I believed to be, my version of the white picket fence dream we've all been convinced of since childhood. It did not take long, however, for me to realize that I wasn't going to be able to handle my full-time school schedule, the new baby, and working a full-time job, especially since I was carrying the bulk of the household responsibilities. So, I made the choice to drop all of my classes for a semester, with the intentions of re-enrolling in the following spring. Although he did not work a regular 9 to 5, Shade Tree was a hustler, and this came in handy because he would take my paychecks and flip them for me, doubling our money. This method worked out for us for a couple of months. Until all of a sudden, things begin to change. Now he's leaving the house, for longer and longer periods, with nothing to show for this time, when he'd finally return. He was also saying weird-ass shit to me, that wasn't making any sense, as well as, accusing me of things that I never gave any reason for. Coming home from work, I was now arriving to my apartment completely trashed, while he was passed out somewhere around the house. The tip of the iceberg for me was when he took the last check that I'd given him to flip, as he usually did, only to return home with a pack of cigarettes and a dime bag of weed. Oh, and the rent was due the next day. He was doing all sorts of creepy shit, going as far as to insisting that I have sex with him even with tears in my eyes, after waking up to him already inside me. I knew something wasn't right, so I reached out to his mother to express concern. Only to have the issues deflected right back to me somehow, something I know she later regretted, but of course we've never spoken about. Knowing Shade Tree, in ways that no one else knew him because of the depths of our connection, alerted me that this was not him. I did not have a clue of what I was supposed to do though. At that time, mental illness was not a discussion in the black community. Not to mention, I later found out that he also began using hardcore drugs, which I was still extremely naive about before this experience. And to make matters even worse, I was pregnant again. The situation reached its climax that last night that I came home exhausted from work, already facing eviction, with my baby girl on my hip, only to, once again, find my apartment trashed and Shadetree sound asleep on the living room couch. Remind you I was 3 months pregnant, so I may have been hormonal, so I will admit I snapped. I woke his ass up abruptly, insisting that he had to go, because I could not do it anymore. To which he sternly replied, "I'll kill you before I'll let someone else have you." Now I do not believe I took these words seriously at first, because I was too caught up in my own rage. I wanted him gone and continued to tell him to get the fuck out now. He had a car parked outside, which he had been planning for months to fix, but never got around to. I gave him one final warning that if he didn't leave, I was going to fuck his car up. Stubbornly refusing to leave, I took that hammer and began busting the windshields of the car. When he finally went outside to see what I'd done, he came back in the house leading with a punch to my face with so much force that I immediately heard a crack. Continuing to punch me in the face so long that he gave me no choice but to grab the hammer again. He was so amped up that he didn't even realize I grabbed it, until I busted him in the head to get him off of me. My face was profusely leaking blood, creating a crimson pool on my living room carpet, with one of my teeth lying in its center. As my vision comes to focus, all I see is my baby girl sitting on the floor, screaming at the top of her lungs from what she'd just witnessed. By the time he left the apartment, my lip was split in 3 places which had to be sewn back together. I had a blood bubble knot over my left eye, which became so swollen that I wasn't able to see out of it for weeks, and I had 3 giant knots on my head, one of which looked like something from a Bugs Bunny cartoon episode. The entire left side of my face looked as though I'd gone 12 rounds with Mike Tyson. Never could I have ever imagined that I'd end up in this victim position, because I am nowhere near a weak individual. And furthermore, Shadetree was the last person I thought would ever actually hit me. I was utterly humiliated and ashamed for allowing myself to become one of those women. I inevitably lost my apartment, so I decided to take the offer to move back in with my father, until I gave birth to my baby boy. My only son, Javian. There is something about becoming a mother to a son, who you know you will have to raise on your own, that instantly empowers you. I call him my strength, bestowing that instant power on me, that would definitely prove necessary in the years to come. There is also an extra special relationship between a mother and son, that's no different from one between a father and daughter. My son always makes me feel like I'm everything with the type of love he shares, giving me confidence in knowing that he will become the kind of man that will elevate a woman's worth. And once again, the love I felt for him, when first being placed in my arms, was instant and undeniable. My fearlessness elevated to a new level, with only one kryptonite. My children. Even though, at this point, my father had literally put a hit out on the life of my son's father. No, seriously. I can honestly say that I've always done my best to allow Shadetree an active part in his son's life. Unfortunately, I've never been able to escape his constant harassment and stalking. Even fearing he'd use my son just to get to me. This led me to making the decision to move back to Atlanta, again, this time a single mother with 2 children. And once again, moving back in with my mother, just for a couple weeks until I found my own place. She was now staying in an apartment complex in Clayton County, which is where I met Aaron. Aaron lived in the neighboring apartment building, and just so happened to be standing outside that day that I was moving in, insistent on helping me with my belongings. He was obviously younger than me and not someone I originally took seriously. However, this chance meeting would turn into a lifelong friendship, and a relationship that would take more twists and turns than any of us could have ever expected. However, Aaron just so happened to meet me at a point in my life when I was extremely broken and angry. Resenting anyone who'd ever played a role in what felt like never-ending misery. And of course, by this point, I projected the majority of this energy onto the entire male population. It did not help that Aaron and I were both young and dumb, and he was just as damaged internally as I was, if not more. I was not in a relationship mental space by this point, and even when I entertained the idea it was never for the right reasons. Still, we became best friends, with benefits, and he became a father to my children, even though he was, technically, still a child himself. You must understand where I was mentally in order to understand why I became this next version of myself. After the battle with Shade Tree, my face remained unrecognizable for over 3 months, and it still took half a year before my teeth were repaired. It would be even longer before I actually felt like I was beautiful again. So, once I finally understood the concept of owning my looks, with all the flaws included, I became an entirely new person. Becoming obsessed with my reflection, as well as my new body, after dropping the baby weight. Also, beginning to truly embrace my feminine side externally, although still thinking like a man. Hell on heels, overnight by my early 20s, leaving any man crossing my path liable to become victim. Having learned how to be a man-eater. A sexually empowered vixen, who uses this sexuality to her every advantage, caring less about the trail left behind of used and abused hearts. As well as an emasculating, heartless bitch, who felt the obligation to treat men the way they so often had no problem treating us. Mentally and spiritually, I was completely lost. Seriously jaded in my thinking, and only caring about how things may have affected me, if not benefit. I was bitter at the fact that the last 2 men I tried to love only left me with babies and a broken heart. Creating a fixed mindset, which was all about taking care of my 2 children by any means necessary. Knowing that when a man approached me, he really only wanted one thing. Making it that much easier to express that I wanted something too. My motto was, and excuse my language. But wet pussy and dry pockets never made any sense. Now I know you're probably clutching your pearls right now, but I do honestly have a different view of sexuality than most. I definitely believe there is power in owning and embracing every aspect of your sexual desires. It is your right to explore, experiment and learn more about yourself as a person. In doing so, you will find yourself becoming more confident and self-assured, and this spills into every aspect of your life. The key is to remember that it is not what you do, but it is how you do it. Never lose respect for yourself, and in that mindset, you will always remain on a higher moral spectrum regardless the circumstance. At this time in my life though, I was rationalizing that I was empowered by my sexuality, and my actions were a symbol of freedom and confidence, which is just as true as it is bullshit. In the right mindset, this would be true, but in hindsight, I know that I lacked awareness of my true value. Truth is, that after all that I'd been through, I was merely too afraid to love again. Now in order for you to truly wrap your head around who I became in those days, I will have to be completely transparent. Fortunately, I do not have any shame of my past, because I would not be who I am today without everything I've ever experienced in my life. This will not stop your judgment however, which is why I'm giving warning. We're now in the period that I like to call my Queen of Clubs era. A time in my life when I was so off the chain, I even had dope boys ready to call the police on me. With stash still in pocket. A few weeks before my 21st birthday I visited a club called 20 Grand in Atlanta. This club would become my playground, and I eventually began working there. In more ways than one. Starting with assisting Gary, who was head of security, and needed help keeping an eye on the line outside the club. Which often wrapped around the building and spilled into the parking lot. Getting paid to monitor and redirect this line if needed, which I'd do for a couple of hours. While also getting money on the side to allow people to cut this line. I then began assisting the bars, managers and even the hustlers in the bathroom, until I was officially on the payroll as a waitress and bartender at their restaurant and bar and grill. Somehow, I eventually became a professional middleman as well. For everything, from pussy to powder. The clubs became my thing. 20 Grand, especially, being my primary hunting ground for thirsty men with money to spare, who were convinced that they had more game than me. Finding so much thrill in these interactions, while constantly strategizing my next calculated move, because, just as in childhood, I still looked at each day as an adventure. My favorite game being the one where I'd leave my house with nothing in my pockets, while saying to myself all the things that I expected to return home with, by scamming these men. Without fail, coming home with everything I wanted and more. And never thinking about consequences or caring about how others may have felt about my actions. deciding that emotions only got in the way, finding it easier to shield my heart from various pains by not allowing myself to care. But if I am being real, I realized during my Club Queen era, most of my decisions were based on the high I was chasing, rather than the next bill I needed to pay. By 21, I was now indulging in harder drugs, like ecstasy, prescription pills, cocaine, and also drinking like a fish. In fact, I couldn't function without the drugs and alcohol, so they began to take priority even over my children. After moving back to Alabama, when I was around 26, I worked a few of the clubs there as well, from lounges to strip clubs. Until this day it was the easiest money I ever made legally. I was an amazing bartender and waitress, making more money in one night than most made all week. Problem with this was the fact that I spent the money faster than I made it, never having anything to show in the end. The clubs came with a lifestyle of its own, one that is not generally conducive for successful parenting. Definitely playing a tremendous role in aiding my drug and alcohol habit, by basically allowing me to do so for free while making money. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I had people pop pills in my mouth, hand me bags of cocaine, or feed me alcohol like it was water, all while still working. And my job usually ended as the sun would come up, but of course I still had a couple more hours of partying to do after clocking out. I would be so hungover some mornings, that I would fail to even get my children to school. So irresponsible, that I almost got myself arrested once, due to their excessive absences. Luckily, I was able to talk it down to an expensive fine, but still. I'll even go so far as to admit that I tried dancing, stripping, once, but I only lasted 2 nights, because I was not willing to give blow jobs, or fuck, complete strangers for $50, which seemed to be the main way the girls were making their money at that particular club. Things even got so low for me at one point, that I had no choice but to ship my children back to Georgia with my mother, while I lived in a whorehouse in the backwoods of Alabama that was disguised as a massage parlor. Permitted to stay only on the account that I had the hookup with a drug dealer, whom I was messing around with at the time, having some of the best products in town for the lowest prices. Screwing me in the end though, when he attempted to rob the place like a dumb ass, which of course they believed I was an accomplice. And in this case, I actually wasn't for once. Even more tragic and humiliating was the fact that the safe he stole was empty. Oh, and let's not forget about this one time that I hooked up with this guy who appeared to be a Prince Charming at first, immediately spoiling me and claiming to be falling in love in less than 24 hours of us meeting. Going as far as introducing me to his entire family and even asking me to move in with him, in the projects where he stayed with his parents, sleeping on a fold-out couch in the living room. Once his psycho came to surface, and I finally realized what I'd gotten myself into, he then actually tried strangling me for trying to leave his crazy ass. His mistake though, because I definitely did not play any games with these niggas after my incident with Shade Tree, call it PTSD. So, I have no shame in admitting that without hesitation or remorse, I had his ass begging for his life before I slowly walked my cocky ass out the door, just wishing he would dare try me again. Remind you, this all transpired within a 3-day period. A few final examples I'll give, since they are endless, was when I was so out of my mind drunk and high, that I almost slept through a fire my baby girl started in the kitchen. Not a small grease fire either, no sir. This sucker was blazing with a roaring vengeance and spreading into the living room by the time I finally became conscious. Or those times I put myself in the most dangerous and reckless situations. Like leaving the club at 4 a.m., wearing dresses that left little to the imagination, walking up streets no one would dare, and having nothing more than my blade for protection. Never having any fear, suffering any major trauma, nor was I ever disrespected or threatened. I cannot express the number of times that divine intervention had to have been responsible for me and my baby's safety. Like I said, these are just a few examples, and actually some of the less extreme of my stories. My downward spiral was so rapid and excessive, that anyone witnessing immediately counted me out, because there are very few that come back from how low I reached morally, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.